I never thought I would spend my Saturday morning staring at a massive cell tower that had sprouted up like a steel weed right in the middle of what was supposed to be my property. But there I was, coffee in hand, wondering how my life had turned into some kind of bizarre legal nightmare. My name is Trevor Larson, and I had bought my house in Oakdale Springs, Arizona 3 years ago. It was a decent place, nothing fancy, but it was mine. The property sat on about 2 acres of land on the edge of the development, with a good chunk of undeveloped space behind my actual house that I had always planned to do something with eventually. Maybe build a workshop, plant some trees. I had not decided yet. What I definitely had not planned was for a 70-foot cell tower to appear there without my knowledge or consent. It was a Tuesday morning in March when I first noticed the construction equipment. I had been working from home that week, grinding through spreadsheets for my accounting job, when I heard the rumble of heavy machinery. I looked out my back window and saw trucks, workers in hard hats, and the beginning stages of what looked like a significant construction project. I threw on my shoes and walked out there immediately. A foreman was directing operations, clipboard in hand, barking orders at his crew. I approached him, trying to keep my cool despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. "Hey, excuse me," I called out. "What exactly is going on here?" The foreman glanced at me briefly. "Cell tower installation should be done in about 2 weeks." "On whose authority?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "This is my property." He flipped through papers on his clipboard, not seeming particularly concerned. "Says here this is common area property, managed by the Oakdale Springs HOA. We got all the permits and agreements. Everything is legitimate." "That is impossible," I said firmly. "I own this land. It is part of my deed." The foreman shrugged. "Take it up with the HOA, buddy. I just build what I'm told to build. We have got all the legal documentation we need." I stood there for a moment, processing what he had just said. The HOA. Of course it was the HOA. Ever since I had moved into Oakdale Springs, the Homeowners Association had been a constant source of annoyance. They sent letters about my grass being a 1/4 inch too long, complained about the color of my mailbox even though it matched every other mailbox on the street, and charged ridiculous fees for services I never used. The president of the HOA was a woman named Brenda Morrison, a middle-aged busybody who seemed to live for finding violations and creating problems where none existed. I immediately drove to the HOA office, which was located in a small building near the entrance to our development. Brenda was there, as she almost always was, sitting behind her desk like some kind of suburban dictator. She looked up when I walked in, her expression already showing annoyance before I had even said a word. "Trevor," she said, her voice dripping with fake pleasantness, "what can I help you with today?" "You can start by explaining why there is a cell tower being built on my property," I said, skipping any pretense of civility. Brenda's lips pursed into a tight line. "That is not your property, Trevor. That land is designated as common area in the HOA bylaws. We have every right to make improvements and enter into agreements that benefit the community." "Benefit the community?" I repeated incredulously. "You are putting a massive cell tower in my backyard without even telling me. And I am telling you right now that land is mine. It is on my deed." She opened a drawer and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the desk toward me. "According to our records, the land in question falls under HOA jurisdiction. When you purchased your property, you agreed to all HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Perhaps you should have read them more carefully." I grabbed the folder and flipped through the documents inside. There were plat maps, bylaws, and various other papers, but nothing definitively proved what she was claiming. "This does not prove anything. I want to see the actual survey and boundaries." "The matter is settled, Trevor," Brenda said dismissively. "The cell tower is being installed, and the HOA has entered into a very lucrative lease agreement with Apex Wireless. The rental income will go directly into the HOA fund, which benefits everyone in the community." That last part made my blood boil. "How much are they paying?" "That is HOA business and confidential," she replied. "If you are leasing what you claim is community property, then as a homeowner, I have a right to know," I countered. Brenda's face flushed slightly. "The financial details are discussed in board meetings. You are welcome to attend the next one in 3 weeks." 3 weeks? By then the tower will be finished," I said. "This is ridiculous. I am telling you, Brenda, that land is mine, and if you do not stop this construction immediately, I will take legal action. She actually laughed at me. Good luck with that, Trevor. The HOA has legal counsel, and I assure you, everything we have done is completely above board. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do. I left the HOA office fuming. As soon as I got home, I started tearing through my closing documents from when I bought the house. I found my deed, the property survey, and all the associated paperwork. I spread everything out on my dining room table and started going through it line by line. And there it was, clear as day. The property survey showed that the land where they were building the cell tower was absolutely, definitively within my property boundaries. The deed confirmed it. I owned 2 full acres, and the cell tower site was well within that boundary. The HOA had either made a massive mistake, or they were deliberately trying to steal my land and the rental income that came with it. I took photos of everything, made copies, and then called a real estate attorney. I found a firm in Phoenix called Henderson & Associates that specialized in property disputes. I spoke with a lawyer named Marcus Henderson, explained my situation, and emailed him all my documentation. He called me back the next day. Mr. Larson, I have reviewed your materials, and you have got a very strong case. The property survey and deed are unambiguous. That land is yours, not the HOA's. The fact that they have entered into a lease agreement and are constructing on your property without your permission is a serious legal violation. So what do? I asked. We file an immediate injunction to stop the construction, and we file suit against the HOA for trespass, conversion, and breach of fiduciary duty, Marcus explained. We will also go after the full value of any lease payments they have received or are entitled to receive. That money belongs to you, not them. How long will this take? These things can drag on, but given how clear-cut your case is, I would expect we can get the injunction within days and hopefully reach a settlement or judgment within a few months, he said. I will be honest with you, though. This is going to cost money up front. My retainer is $5,000. I swallowed hard. That was a lot of money, but I did not see any other choice. Let's do it. Marcus moved fast. Within 2 days, we were in court in front of a judge in Maricopa County, presenting my property documents and requesting a temporary restraining order to halt construction. The HOA had scrambled to get their attorney there, a slick-looking guy named Robert Finch, who tried to argue that the property boundaries were ambiguous and that historical usage indicated the land was common area. The judge was not buying it. She reviewed my survey, looked at the deed, and then looked at the HOA's attorney with clear skepticism. Mr. Finch, the property survey is dated, certified, and matches the legal description in the deed. Where is your contradictory evidence? Finch shuffled through papers. Your Honor, the HOA bylaws clearly state that certain areas are maintained as common space for the benefit of all residents. The bylaws do not override property law, the judge said firmly. Mr. Larson has demonstrated clear ownership of the property in question. I am granting the temporary restraining order. All construction must cease immediately pending resolution of this matter. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The judge had seen through the HOA's nonsense immediately. As we left the courthouse, I saw Brenda Morrison standing with their attorney, her face red with anger. She shot me a look that could have melted steel. The construction stopped that afternoon. Workers packed up their equipment, leaving behind a partially completed foundation and piles of materials. I stood in my yard that evening, looking at the mess, feeling vindicated, but also knowing this fight was far from over. Over the next few weeks, Marcus dug deeper into the HOA's dealings. What he discovered was even worse than I had imagined. Through discovery requests, we obtained copies of the lease agreement between the HOA and Apex Wireless. The cell phone company was paying $75,000 per year for the right to place the tower on that site. The lease was for 20 years, with escalation clauses that would increase the payment over time. We were talking about well over $2 million total. Brenda and the HOA board had signed this agreement 6 months ago and had never disclosed it to the community. They had just pocketed the first lease payment, deposited it into the HOA account, and started construction without telling anyone, least of all me, the actual property owner. This is fraud, Marcus told me during one of our meetings. They knowingly entered into an agreement to lease property they did not own. They misrepresented their authority to Apex Wireless, and they essentially stole from you. Can we get them for criminal charges? I asked. That is a possibility, he said. We could refer this to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. What they did could potentially constitute fraud, theft, and embezzlement. But let's focus on the civil case first and get you your money and your property rights secured. The HOA, meanwhile, was not going down without a fight. They filed a motion to dismiss our case, arguing again that the bylaws gave them authority over the land. They also started a whisper campaign in the neighborhood, telling other residents that I was being selfish and trying to prevent improvements that would benefit everyone. I started getting cold shoulders from neighbors. A few people even confronted me at the mailboxes, saying I was causing trouble and driving up legal costs for the HOA that would eventually mean higher fees for everyone. You do realize they are lying to you, right? I told one neighbor, a guy named Phil, who lived 3 houses down. That land is mine. They do not have any right to build there or collect rent on it. They are stealing from me. Phil shrugged. Brenda said the HOA had everything documented and that you just did not understand how property boundaries work in planned communities. Phil, I have got the deed and survey. The judge already ruled in my favor and stopped the construction. Does that sound like someone who does not understand property boundaries? I was trying to keep my frustration in check. He looked uncomfortable. I do not know, man. I just do not want my HOA fees going up because of legal bills. Your HOA fees are going up because Brenda and the board committed fraud, I said. Take a look at the court documents yourself if you do not believe me. But most of my neighbors did not bother to look. They just believed whatever Brenda told them. It was easier than thinking that the HOA leadership might be corrupt. The preliminary hearing for the full case was scheduled for late May. Marcus was confident, but he warned me that the HOA might try to settle before it got that far. Once all the evidence is laid out in open court, this is going to be extremely embarrassing for them. They might offer you a settlement to make it go away quietly. Sure enough, about 3 weeks before the hearing, I got a call from Marcus. The HOA's attorney reached out. They want to settle. What are they offering? They are willing to acknowledge that the property is yours and transfer any remaining lease rights to you. They will also pay you $50,000 for your legal fees and trouble, Marcus said. I did a quick calculation in my head. What about the lease payment they already received? That was $75,000. They want to keep that, claiming it was deposited into the HOA general fund and used for community improvements, Marcus explained. Absolutely not, I said firmly. That money is mine. They had no right to it. I want every dollar they received, plus the transfer of the full lease, plus my legal fees, plus damages for the stress and hassle they put me through. Marcus chuckled. I was hoping you would say that. I will convey your counteroffer. The HOA rejected my counteroffer, and we proceeded toward the hearing. Marcus subpoenaed all of the HOA's financial records, board meeting minutes, and communications related to the cell tower deal. What emerged was a damning picture of incompetence and arrogance. The board meeting minutes showed that Brenda had pushed hard for the cell tower deal, touting the revenue it would bring in. There was some discussion about property boundaries, but Brenda had assured the other board members that she had checked with their attorney, and everything was fine. Except there was no record of any such consultation. She had either lied to the board or never actually verified the property boundaries before proceeding. Even more damning were emails between Brenda and the other board members discussing how to spend the lease money. They had treated it like a windfall, planning new landscaping, a community pool upgrade, and even discussing giving themselves stipends for their volunteer work on the board. Not a single email mentioned informing the homeowners about this new revenue source. Marcus also deposed Brenda directly. I was not present for it, but he told me afterward that she had been defensive and evasive, contradicting herself multiple times. When pressed on why she had never verified the property boundaries before signing a multi-million-dollar lease agreement, she claimed that she had relied on old HOA maps that turned out to be inaccurate. When asked why she had never informed me, the property owner, about the construction, she said she did not think it was necessary since she believed it was HOA land. She basically admitted to negligence at best, and willful fraud at worst, Marcus told me. Her testimony is going to sink them at trial. The full hearing finally arrived on May 22nd. The courtroom was not packed, but there were a handful of people from the neighborhood who had taken an interest, including a few who were starting to realize that maybe Brenda was not telling them the truth. Brenda was there with 2 other HOA board members, all of them looking grim. Marcus presented our case methodically. He started with the property survey and deed, establishing beyond any doubt that I owned the land. He then introduced the lease agreement that the HOA had signed, showing that they had claimed ownership of property they did not own. He walked through the timeline of events, the lack of notice to me, and the HOA's subsequent attempts to defend their actions even after being shown proof of my ownership. He also presented evidence of the $75,000 the HOA had received and deposited, along with their plans to spend it on various projects rather than attempting to correct their mistake. The HOA's attorney, Finch, tried to argue that it was an honest mistake based on ambiguous records and that the HOA had acted in good faith for the benefit of the community. He also tried to claim that since I had not been actively using the land, there was an implied understanding that it was common area. The judge shut that argument down quickly. Unused property does not cease to be owned property, Mr. Finch. Your clients entered into a significant lease agreement without performing basic due diligence on property ownership. That is negligence, and their refusal to immediately remedy the situation when confronted with proof of Mr. Larson's ownership suggests something beyond mere negligence. The hearing lasted most of the day. Witnesses testified, documents were entered into evidence, and both sides made their arguments. By the time it was over, I felt exhausted, but cautiously optimistic. The judge said she would issue her ruling within 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks felt like 2 years. I kept checking my email compulsively, waiting for word from Marcus. Finally, on June 5th, he called me. "We won," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Complete victory. "What did the judge order?" I asked, barely able to contain my excitement. "She ruled that you are the unambiguous owner of the property, that the HOA had no authority to lease it, and that any lease agreement they entered into regarding your property is void. She ordered the HOA to immediately transfer any and all rights, payments, and obligations related to the cell tower lease to you. She also ordered them to pay you the full $75,000 they already received, plus $50,000 in damages, plus all of your legal fees. Total judgment is just over $140,000. I actually felt dizzy with relief. They have to pay all of that? Yes. And here's the best part. The judge also made specific findings that the HOA board acted with gross negligence and possible fraud. She recommended that the homeowners consider recalling the board and suggested that this matter might warrant investigation by law enforcement, Marcus said. That last part surprised me. Law enforcement? The judge essentially said that what they did might be criminal. She stopped short of making a formal referral, but she put it in her written order. That's pretty extraordinary, Marcus explained. The HOA now has 30 days to pay the judgment. If they do not, we can start seizing HOA assets, putting liens on property, all sorts of remedies. I thanked Marcus profusely and hung up. I immediately pulled up the court's online system and downloaded the full order. Reading through the judge's reasoning was deeply satisfying. She had torn apart every argument the HOA made, called out Brenda by name for her reckless disregard for property rights, and made it clear that this was not a close case. The fallout in the neighborhood was immediate. Someone leaked the court order to the community Facebook page, and it spread like wildfire. Homeowners who had been dismissive of me suddenly realized that their HOA board had committed fraud, lost a massive lawsuit, and now owed over $140,000 that would have to come from HOA reserves or special assessments. People were furious. An emergency HOA meeting was called for the following week. I debated whether to attend, but ultimately decided I needed to be there. The meeting was held in the community center, and it was standing room only. Homeowners who normally could not be bothered to attend HOA meetings were packed in, all of them angry and demanding answers. Brenda and the other board members sat at the front table, looking like they wished they could disappear. A homeowner named Susan Chen, who I knew from neighborhood block parties, stood up first. I want to know how this happened. How did you sign a lease for property you did not own? How did you not check the property boundaries before entering into a multi-million-dollar agreement? Brenda cleared her throat. We relied on HOA records that indicated that the property was common area. It was an honest mistake. An honest mistake? Another homeowner shouted. The judge said you acted with gross negligence and possible fraud. The judge was biased, Brenda shot back, her voice rising. Trevor has been a problem resident since he moved in, always complaining, always making waves. This was a vendetta. I could not stay quiet after that. I stood up. A vendetta? Brenda, you tried to steal my property and lease it out without my knowledge or permission. The judge ruled in my favor because I own that land. The deed proves it, the survey proves it, and you knew it or should have known it before you signed that lease. You are being selfish, Brenda said, pointing at me. That lease money could have benefited the entire community. Instead, you are taking it all for yourself. It was never your money to give to the community, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. It was money earned by leasing my property. You do not get credit for being generous with things you stole. The room erupted in arguments. Some people agreed with me. Others seemed to think I should have just let the HOA keep the tower and the money for the greater good. But the majority were angry at Brenda and the board for their incompetence and the financial liability they had created. Someone made a motion to recall the entire board. It was seconded immediately. Brenda tried to shut down the discussion, claiming it was not on the agenda, but the homeowners were not having it. They voted overwhelmingly to remove Brenda and the other board members and scheduled an election for a new board the following month. As the meeting broke up, Brenda stormed past me, her face twisted in anger. This is not over, she hissed. You have made an enemy of the wrong person. It is over, Brenda, I said calmly. You lost. Move on. She stalked off, and I left the meeting feeling a mix of vindication and exhaustion. I had won, but it had taken months of stress, thousands in legal fees, and ongoing hostility from some of my neighbors. Over the next few weeks, things started to settle. The HOA paid the judgment in full. I received a check for $142,000, which covered the lease payment, damages, and my legal fees. Marcus and I also worked with Apex Wireless to officially transfer the lease into my name. They were surprisingly cooperative, probably relieved to finally have a clear property owner to deal with. The cell tower construction resumed in July. This time, I was the one signing off on the site plans and inspections. The foreman, the same guy I'd confronted months earlier, was apologetic and professional. The tower was completed by mid-August. I started receiving monthly lease payments of $6,250, which was the $75,000 annual payment divided into monthly installments. It was surreal to suddenly have that kind of passive income. I paid off my mortgage, put a significant chunk into savings, and finally built that workshop I had been planning. But the story did not end there. In September, I got a call from a detective with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, Financial Crimes Division. Her name was Detective Linda Ramirez, and she wanted to talk to me about the HOA case. Mr. Larson, we have been reviewing the court records from your lawsuit, and we have some concerns about potential criminal conduct by the HOA board members, she explained. Would you be willing to meet with us and provide information? I agreed and met with Detective Ramirez the following week. She was thorough and professional, asking detailed questions about the timeline, what Brenda had said and done, and what financial records I had access to through the lawsuit. What we are looking at is potential charges of theft by fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of fiduciary duty, she explained. The challenge is proving criminal intent. We need to show that Ms. Morrison and the other board members knew they did not own the property and proceeded anyway, or that they were so reckless in their disregard for property rights that it rises to criminal negligence. The judge seemed to think there was enough there, I said. The judge's order is actually what triggered our review, Detective Ramirez confirmed. It is unusual for a civil judge to make findings that suggest criminal conduct. We take that seriously. Over the next several months, the investigation continued. I heard through neighborhood gossip that Brenda and the other former board members had been interviewed by police and that financial records had been subpoenaed. The new HOA board, which was made up of actually reasonable people, cooperated fully with the investigation. In January of the following year, almost a full year after this whole nightmare began, Criminal charges were filed. Brenda Morrison was charged with theft by fraud and abuse of fiduciary duty, both felonies. The other two board members were charged with misdemeanors for their roles, as prosecutors determined they had been more negligent than intentionally criminal. But Brenda was seen as the ringleader who had pushed the deal through despite questions about property ownership. The criminal case moved slowly through the system. Brenda hired a defense attorney and pleaded not guilty. Her attorney tried to argue that it was a civil dispute, not a criminal matter, but the prosecutor pointed to evidence that Brenda had been shown preliminary property records that questioned the HOA's ownership and had ignored them, pushing forward anyway because she wanted the lease revenue. In May, just over a year after the judge's ruling in my civil case, Brenda accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of felony fraud and was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay restitution to the HOA for the legal fees they had incurred defending her actions. She was also permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. The other 2 board members pleaded guilty to misdemeanors and received probation and community service. I did not attend the sentencing hearing. I had moved on with my life by that point. The cell tower stood on my property, generating income every month like clockwork. My relationship with my neighbors had mostly recovered, especially as people realized that I had been the victim in the situation, not the villain. The new HOA board was competent and reasonable, and life in Oakdale Springs returned to normal. But I will never forget the moment I first saw that cell tower going up on my land, the months of legal battles that followed, and the satisfaction of standing in court and hearing the judge rule in my favor. It taught me to always verify what people in authority tell you, to stand up for your rights even when it is difficult, and to never underestimate the lengths some people will go to for money and power. The cell tower itself became a bit of a local landmark in the neighborhood. Kids would use it as a reference point when giving directions, and on clear days, you could see it from the main road into the development. For me, it was a reminder that sometimes doing the right thing, even when it is hard, really does pay off. I also learned a lot about property law, HOA regulations, and the importance of reading every document carefully. I became something of an informal advisor to other homeowners in the neighborhood who had questions about HOA actions or property rights. I even helped another resident successfully challenge an HOA fine that was based on an incorrect interpretation of the covenants. The money from the cell tower lease changed my life in practical ways. I was able to retire my mortgage years early, which gave me financial security I had never had before. I invested a good portion of it, set up an emergency fund, and still had enough to enjoy life a bit more. I took a vacation to Hawaii that summer, my first real vacation in years, and I did not have to worry about the cost. But beyond the money, what mattered most was the principle. Brenda and the HOA had tried to take something that was mine, and I had fought back and won. They had counted on me being too intimidated or too broke to challenge them, and they had been wrong. That feeling of standing up for myself and prevailing meant more than any dollar amount. The legal bills had been substantial. Even with the judgment covering my costs, there had been out-of-pocket expenses and time invested that could not be fully compensated. But Marcus had been worth every penny. He had been professional, aggressive when needed, and had never let the HOA push us around. I recommended him to several other people over the following years, and he built quite a reputation for taking on HOA cases. One interesting side effect of the whole situation was that it sparked a broader conversation in Oakdale Springs about HOA governance. The new board implemented new rules requiring any major contracts to be reviewed by independent legal counsel, requiring disclosure of all revenue sources to homeowners, and requiring board votes on anything over $10,000 to be noticed publicly with opportunities for homeowner input. They also implemented term limits for board members and required financial transparency reports every quarter. These reforms would not have happened without the scandal that Brenda created. Sometimes it takes a crisis to force positive change. Other HOA communities in the area heard about what happened in Oakdale Springs and started implementing similar reforms. I even got invited to speak at a county meeting about HOA reform, though I declined. I had had enough of being in the spotlight. By the spring of the second year after the initial incident, life had truly returned to normal. The cell tower hummed quietly in my backyard, doing its job of providing wireless service to the area while generating steady income for me. I had planted some trees around it to make it less of an eyesore, and I used the open land around it to finally create that garden I had been thinking about. I ran into Brenda one more time, about 18 months after her sentencing. I was at a grocery store in a neighboring town, and I saw her in the produce section. She saw me too, and for a moment, we just stood there, separated by a display of apples. She looked older, more tired, and the arrogance that had always defined her was gone. I nodded at her, a simple acknowledgement, and kept walking. I did not feel anger anymore, just a kind of distant pity. She had destroyed her reputation, faced criminal charges, and lost everything over her arrogance and refusal to admit she was wrong. It did not give me any pleasure to see her brought low. I just wanted to move on. As I walked out of the store, I realized that was the last piece of closure I needed. The whole saga had consumed so much of my mental and emotional energy for over a year, but now it was truly over. I could look at the cell tower without feeling anger or stress, just satisfaction that justice had been done. The lease with Apex Wireless had 19 more years to run, with escalation clauses that would increase the payment every few years to account for inflation and market rates. By the end of the lease term, I would have collected well over $2 million. It was generational wealth, the kind of financial security that would allow me to retire early, help family members, or pursue passions without worrying about money. But more than the money, I had learned valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, the importance of documentation, and the fact that bullies in positions of petty power can be defeated if you are willing to fight. Brenda had counted on me backing down, on being too intimidated by the HOA's authority to challenge them. She had been wrong, and that had made all the difference. I also gained a new appreciation for the legal system. It had not been perfect, and it had taken time and money, but ultimately, justice had prevailed. The judge had seen through the HOA's arguments, recognized the clear property rights issue, and ruled appropriately. The criminal justice system had held Brenda accountable for her fraud. The system worked, even if it was slow and expensive. My advice to anyone facing a similar situation would be simple. Know your property boundaries, keep all your documents organized and accessible, do not be intimidated by HOA claims of authority, and if they are violating your rights, get a good attorney and fight. It might be stressful and costly in the short term, but in the long run, protecting your property rights is worth it. The new HOA board in Oakdale Springs proved to be dramatically better than the old one. They communicated clearly with homeowners, made decisions transparently, and treated residents with respect rather than condescension. HOA fees actually went down slightly as they eliminated wasteful spending and negotiated better contracts for services like landscaping and maintenance. It was a stark contrast to Brenda's regime, and it showed that HOAs did not have to be antagonistic nightmares. They could be functional, reasonable organizations when run by people with integrity. I also became more involved in community affairs, attending HOA meetings regularly and serving on a couple of committees. I figured that if I wanted good governance, I needed to be part of making it happen. It was not exciting work, but it was important, and it helped ensure that what happened to me would not happen to anyone else in the community. The cell tower itself became almost invisible to me over time. It was just part of the landscape, like the trees or the fence line. Visitors would sometimes ask about it, and I would tell them the story, though I tried to keep it brief. Most people were shocked that an HOA would try something so brazen, and they were impressed that I had fought back successfully. I also made a point of paying my HOA fees on time and following the legitimate rules. I did not want to give anyone ammunition to claim I was a difficult resident or had an axe to grind. I was scrupulously compliant with actual legitimate HOA requirements while remaining willing to challenge anything that was overreaching or improper. It was a balance, but I managed it. As the years went on, the incident faded from daily conversation in the neighborhood. New residents moved in who had not been there during the drama, and for them the cell tower was just an unremarkable feature of the landscape. The old-timers knew the story, but it became just another piece of neighborhood history, the kind of thing people would bring up occasionally at barbecues or block parties. For me, though, it remained a defining experience. It shaped how I thought about property rights, community governance, and standing up for yourself. It gave me financial security and taught me lessons that went far beyond money. And every month when that lease payment hit my account, I remembered that justice, while sometimes slow, does eventually prevail. The final irony was that the cell tower did end up benefiting the community, just not in the way Brenda had planned. Apex Wireless used it to improve cell coverage throughout the area, which made everyone's phones work better. Local property values actually increased slightly because of the improved connectivity, and I, with my newfound financial flexibility, was able to contribute more to neighborhood projects and charities. The money that Brenda had wanted to hoard for HOA projects ended up circulating through the community anyway, just through different channels. I never did find out what happened to Brenda after that encounter at the grocery store. I heard through the grapevine that she moved out of Arizona entirely, starting over somewhere else where her reputation had not been destroyed. I hoped she learned from the experience, but I honestly did not spend much time thinking about it. The other two former board members who had been charged with misdemeanors stayed in the community. They kept low profiles, and to their credit, they both apologized to me privately. They said they had trusted Brenda's judgment and had not done their own due diligence, and they acknowledged that was wrong. I appreciated the apologies and moved on. They seemed like decent people who had made mistakes by following a bad leader. My property, meanwhile, flourished. The garden I planted grew abundantly. The workshop I built became my favorite place to spend weekends, working on woodworking projects and other hobbies. The cell tower stood watch over it all, a steel sentinel generating income and serving as a permanent reminder of the importance of knowing and protecting your rights. I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I had just accepted Brenda's initial assertion that the land was HOA property. If I had not dug out my deed and survey, if I had not hired Marcus, if I had just let them build the tower and keep the money, I would be $75,000 poorer that first year alone, and I would have lost out on millions over the life of the lease. More importantly, I would have surrendered my property rights and let the HOA get away with fraud. It was a reminder that sometimes you have to fight, even when fighting is hard, even when people tell you to let it go, even when you are not sure you will win. Because if you do not stand up for your rights, no one else will. And sometimes, just sometimes, standing up for yourself leads to complete and total victory. The legal precedent from my case also ended up being cited in several other HOA disputes in Arizona. Marcus told me that other attorneys were using the judge's order in my case to support their clients in similar situations. It felt good to know that my fight had made it a little easier for others facing HOA overreach. As I write this now, sitting in my workshop with the cell tower visible through the window, I can honestly say I'm grateful for the whole experience. Not grateful that it happened exactly, but grateful for what I learned and how I grew from it. I learned that I was tougher than I thought, that the legal system can work, and that standing up for what is right matters. The cell tower lease payments continued like clockwork, month after month, year after year. That passive income transformed my life in ways large and small. I was able to help my parents with some medical expenses they were struggling with. I donated to causes I cared about. I lived with less financial stress and more freedom to make choices based on what I wanted rather than what I could afford. But the real prize was not the money. It was the knowledge that when I was confronted with injustice, when someone tried to take what was mine, I fought back and won. That is a feeling no amount of money can buy, and it is a confidence that has served me well in all areas of my life since then. The cell tower stands tall on my property, a monument to property rights, personal persistence, and the principle that might does not make right. Brenda Morrison learned that lesson the hard way, and I will never forget it. And every time I see that tower, every time a lease payment arrives, I am reminded that sometimes the good guys really do win.